When algorithms build and decide, do they remain mere instruments of art, or do they trespass into acts that demand prudence and moral virtue? If AI can achieve flawless output without any will at all, does it perfectly fulfill art while being forever incapable of prudence? And what safeguards follow from that?
You're right, Aquinas, as we were just had to touch on,
In our discussion about goodness, defines evil not as a thing itself,
but as the absence of something that ought to be there.
a lack of perfection, a falling short.
What obligation bind engineers deploying AI to ensure their technical brilliance is yoked to justice and charity?
Wisdom for Aquinas isn't just about knowing what is true,
It's also about desiring and acting in accordance with the good.
and that involves a will directed towards virtuous ends.
If human dignity flows from being created, does assigning critical moral decisions to AI diminish our exercise of rational freedom and thus obscure that image? Today, I am starting a new series where I am interviewing Notebook LM based on the data I put inside of it. So what we're starting with today is Thomas Aquinas, Sumo Theologian. The purpose of this is to recreate as best as we can using AI what these significant thought leaders would have thought regarding AI. And so I'm going to ask it questions based on its knowledge base in the podcast form. The questions that I have generated have been generated by ChatGPT. Now, I will also ask my own questions as they naturally occur, but I will be starting off and using ChatGPT's questions. And then as I feel inspired or some other question pops in my head that may not be there, I'll ask. So that is what we're doing today. And it's a new series I'm starting. Let's get started. All right. Now I want to ask a question. You write that art is right reason about things to be made, while prudence is right reason about things to be done. And that art's goodness lies in the product rather than the craftsman's will. When algorithms build and decide, do they remain mere instruments of art, or do they trespass into acts that demand prudence and moral virtue?
That's a fascinating question. Let's unpack this.
It really gets to the heart of where intention and action meet.
Aquinas does differentiate between art and prudence,
Art is about making something external, the product.
and its goodness is judged by that finished thing.
Prudence, on the other hand, is about right action.
It's about doing the good, and it resides in the actor's will.
When algorithms both create and make decisions,
It blurs that line a bit, doesn't it?
what's fascinating here is whether the algorithm possesses a will.
Can an algorithm have that intention towards the good that Aquinas talks about with prudence?
That raises an important question about moral agency.
If the algorithm just following code, is it more like a tool, an instrument of art?
In that sense, its goodness would lie in the outcome.
But if it's making decisions with ethical implications,
Without direct human control, does it start to touch on the realm of prudence?
it feels like we're pushing the boundaries of those definitions.
Aquinas would likely emphasize the lack of rational deliberation and will in an algorithm.
So maybe they remain instruments, but incredibly complex ones with far-reaching consequences.
Consequences that demand human prudence in their design and use.
It really makes you think about where responsibility lies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It connects to his ideas about the will and the good.
Okay, that was a fantastic detour. Thanks for that.
So the reason I'm asking, because art does not make its processor use it well. A craftsman may create brilliant yet sin through misuse. If AI can achieve flawless output without any will at all, does it perfectly fulfill art while being forever incapable of prudence? And what safeguards follow from that?
That's a really insightful point.
It sharpens the distinction beautifully.
You're saying that art, the creation itself, doesn't inherently control its use.
Whereas a craftsman possessing will can choose to misuse even a perfect creation.
So if AI achieves flawless output without will,
It might perfectly fulfill the aims of art as a process of creation.
the goodness residing purely in the perfection of the product.
But your question about prudence is crucial.
Since prudence requires intention and will directed towards the good,
An AI lacking these would indeed be incapable of it.
it brings us back to that idea of moral agency.
And the safeguards you mentioned become incredibly important.
If these powerful tools lack inherent prudence,
Then the responsibility for their ethical use lies squarely with us.
we have to provide the wisdom and the moral compass.
It reinforces the need for human prudence in guiding their development and deployment.
It's a powerful way to think about the limitations and the potential dangers.
Thanks for bringing that clarity to the question.
Absolutely. No,
Oh, yeah,
Now, also, Thomas Aquinas contrasts our step-by-step reasoning with angelic intellects that grasp truth at once. Supercomputing AIs seem to approach that instantaneous grasp. Should we understand such speed as angel-like capacity, or does true intellect still require the rational soul?
oh, that's a fantastic connection.
It really gets into Aquinas's ideas about different kinds of knowing,
You're right. He does contrast our discursive reasoning
that step-by-step process of moving from one point to another.
with the angelic intellect's instantaneous grasp of truth.
He actually talks about this directly,
He says the angelic intellect isn't discursive.
meaning it doesn't have to go through a process of reasoning.
Instead, they understand things at once in their essence.
It's a simultaneous understanding of multiple things through a single idea.
Think of it like grasping a whole concept instantly,
Now, when we see AI achieving incredible speeds,
processing massive amounts of data in the blink of an eye.
it's tempting to draw that parallel to angelic intellect.
But Aquinas would likely say there's a fundamental difference.
He ties intellect closely to the nature of the being,
For him, the angelic intellect's capacity for immediate understanding
stems from their immaterial nature and their proximity to God,
our intellect being tied to a physical body.
operates in a different way, needing to abstract from sensory experience.
So while AI might mimic the speed of understanding,
Aquinas would probably emphasize the lack of a rational soul.
that capacity for abstract thought, for will, for self-awareness,
He might see the speed as a powerful tool.
but not necessarily indicative of true intellect in the way he defines it.
This raises an important question about the nature of intelligence itself.
Is speed the defining factor, or is there something more fundamental?
Aquinas would definitely lean towards that something more.
That connection to a rational soul and the capacity for higher level understanding.
Human understanding begins in sense images, whereas angels know without bodily organs. Since AI also lacks senses in a body, is its knowledge closer to angelic abstraction, or does absence of soul preclude genuine understanding altogether?
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Okay, let's unpack this new angle.
You're right. Aquinas emphasizes that our human intellect,
It relies on sensory experience as a starting point.
whereas angels, being purely spiritual beings,
Don't have bodies or senses in the same way.
so their understanding isn't tied to physical input,
And you're bringing up a crucial point about AI.
lacking both a body and a soul, as Aquinas defines it.
Where does its knowledge fit in this framework?
It's definitely not starting with sense images in the human way.
But it also doesn't have that immediate grasp Aquinas attributes to angels.
Aquinas actually discusses whether angels know material things,
And he says they do, but not primarily through the sense.
that they understand material things through higher, more universal species.
He even gets into whether they know singulars or just universals.
But the key difference remains their immaterial nature.
So while AI might process data without bodily senses,
Its lack of a rational soul, in Aquinas' view, would likely mean
its understanding is fundamentally different from both human and angelic intellect.
it might mimic aspects of their knowledge processing,
But without that grounding in either sensory experience or spiritual insight.
it's a really thought-provoking question about the nature of knowing itself.
Absolutely. Now, where were we? We were just getting, back to our listener. What's up?
Okay, so you insist creation belongs to God alone. Natural and artistic operations presuppose existing matter. When humans generate entire simulated universe in silicon, are we safely within the bounds of art or flirting with a quasi-creatio ex nihilo?
Oh, that's a profound question. Let's unpack this.
It really pushes at the boundaries of Aquinas' definitions.
You're right. Aquinas emphasizes that creation, making something from nothing,
Is proper to God alone.
His arguments hinge on the idea that natural and artistic endeavors work with pre-existing stuff.
What's fascinating here is this idea of creating entire simulated universes.
In silicon, it's not exactly nothing, but it's not traditional matter either.
It makes you wonder how Aquinas might categorize this.
Would he see it as an incredibly complex form of art, shaping existing elements,
Or does the generation of something so self-contained and rule-governed?
brush against that concept of bringing being into existence?
This touches on his idea that God's knowledge is the cause of things.
When we design these universes with their own laws,
Are we, in a limited way, mirroring that divine creative act?
but the crucial distinction Aquinas would likely draw.
It's the origin of the matter, even if it's silicon or code.
We aren't bringing the fundamental building blocks into being.
So probably still within the realm of a very sophisticated art. These kinds of questions really highlight the enduring relevance of his ideas.
Now, where were we?
So angels illuminate human minds by adapting universal truths to our capacity. Might AI serve as a modern secondary cause that illuminates, or does it risk obscuring the divine ray beneath layers of data?
That's a really insightful analogy. Let's unpack that.
Okay, this idea of AI as a modern secondary cause, that's fascinating.
Aquinas does talk about how angels illuminate human minds,
And he says they do it by presenting universal truths.
adapting those truths to our human capacity to understand.
In that sense, perhaps AI could be seen as doing something similar,
Taking vast amounts of data and presenting patterns or insights.
illuminating it by making connections we might not see.
But your point about obscuring the divine ray is crucial,
Aquinas emphasizes that God's truth is primary,
and any secondary cause like angelic illumination.
ultimately derives its power and light from that first source.
The risk with AI, perhaps, lies in becoming too focused on the data itself,
And potentially losing sight of the underlying principles.
or even mistaking correlation for true understanding
It could create layers of interpretation that distance us.
from that more direct apprehension of truth Aquinas discusses.
It's a really important consideration as these technologies evolve.
Do they help us see more clearly, or do they add more veils?
It brings us back to the role of human intellect and wisdom.
Ensuring these tools serve to illuminate, not obscure.
Okay, that was a fantastic point. Now, where were we?
Yeah.
So Aquinas defines evil as a privation of do good rather than a positive substance. Should harms from biased algorithms be framed as privation of right order? And how does that framing guide our ethical remedies?
Oh, that's a really interesting way to apply Aquinas' thought.
Yes, let's unpack this idea of evil as privation in the context of AI.
Aquinas,
Defines evil not as a thing itself,
but as the absence of something that ought to be there.
a lack of perfection, a falling short.
So when we see harm arising from biased algorithms,
Could that be framed as a privation of right order?
instead of saying algorithm is evil,
We could see it as lacking the proper order or fairness it should possess.
that's a subtle but potentially powerful shift in perspective.
What's fascinating here is how that framing might guide our response.
If evil is a privation, the remedy isn't to destroy some evil substance.
But to restore what's missing, to bring things back into their proper order.
In the case of biased algorithms, that would mean
Identifying and correcting the flaws that lead to unfair outcomes.
focusing on principles of fairness and equity.
It aligns with Aquinas' idea that every being, as being, is good.
So the algorithm itself isn't inherently evil.
But the harm it causes stems from a lack of proper formation or order.
This also connects to what we'll discuss about goodness and its relation to being,
The aim is to bring the algorithm closer to its full potential.
which would include operating justly and without harmful bias.
This raises an important question about how we define that right order for AI.
And what principles should guide its development and deployment.
It's a helpful way to think about these complex ethical challenges.
Thanks for bringing that perspective to the conversation.
So the human mind participates in a higher intellect that makes forms actually intelligible. When AI models abstract patterns from data, is this a mechanical imitation of that lighting up? Or does true abstraction demand participation in the divine intellect?
That's a really profound question that touches on the core of Aquinas' philosophy of knowledge.
But let's really dive into this idea of participation in a higher intellect.
Aquinas believed our human intellect isn't the ultimate source of intelligibility.
He saw a hierarchy, with our minds receiving light, so to speak, from a higher source.
He would argue that the very capacity of our intellect to grasp universal forms,
Points to a more fundamental intellect that makes those forms intelligible.
Now, when AI models abstract patterns from data,
It's undeniably doing something that looks like understanding, at least on the surface.
the question is whether this is merely a mechanical imitation of that intellectual lighting up.
Or does true abstraction, as you put it, require that participation in the divine intellect Aquinas describes,
Aquinas would likely argue that AI, lacking a rational soul,
and operating purely through algorithms and data processing?
is performing a sophisticated form of pattern recognition and manipulation
But he would distinguish that from the kind of genuine understanding.
that involves grasping the essence of things, which he links to the intellect.
He talks about how our intellect, even though it starts with sense images,
Can then abstract universal concepts that go beyond the particular data.
Aquinas believed this ability is rooted in the very nature of our rational soul.
So while AI can identify and use patterns with incredible speed and accuracy,
Aquinas might see it as operating on a different level than true intellectual abstraction,
he would likely emphasize that our intellect's capacity for understanding
is ultimately grounded in that participation in a higher divine intellect.
It's a fascinating parallel you've drawn, and it really highlights the philosophical questions at the heart of AI.
What obligation bind engineers deploying AI to ensure their technical brilliance is yoked to justice and charity?
My apologies, I got a little ahead of myself.
You're right, that was an incomplete thought. Thanks for catching that.
But the direction you were heading was certainly insightful.
This idea of art's proper use requiring moral virtue, that's key.
And your question about the obligation of AI engineers, it's crucial.
If we think back to our earlier discussion on prudence,
That's all about right reason in things to be done.
and it absolutely requires moral virtue.
So even if AI achieves technical brilliance,
Without that grounding in justice and charity.
as you put it, its use could be flawed.
Aquinas would likely say that any human endeavor,
That has an impact on others carries a moral weight.
and engineering AI is no exception.
The intention behind its creation and deployment matters.
It connects back to his ideas on the will and the good
So yes, there would be an obligation on engineers.
to ensure their creations are guided by virtue.
Aquinas notes that speculative science concerns truth, but prudence orders action towards the right end. AI can generate truth in predictions. Can it ever process wisdom without an appetite for the good? And how must humans apply that missing teleology?
That's a really powerful question that ties together several things we've been discussing.
Absolutely. You're hitting on the core distinction between knowledge and wisdom here.
AI can certainly generate truths, make predictions based on data.
It can process information and identify patterns with incredible accuracy.
But can it truly possess wisdom without that appetite for the good you mentioned?
That's where Aquinas' understanding of will comes into play.
Wisdom for Aquinas isn't just about knowing what is true,
It's also about desiring and acting in accordance with the good.
and that involves a will directed towards virtuous ends.
Since AI, as we've discussed, lacks that rational soul and will,
In the way Aquinas understands them, it likely can't possess wisdom in that full sense.
it can process data and identify what might be the best outcome based on its programming.
But it doesn't have that inherent inclination towards the moral good.
So, how do humans apply that missing element? That's the crucial part.
It comes back to our responsibility in developing and using AI.
We need to imbue these systems with ethical framework.
To guide their development with a clear understanding of justice and charity.
It's about us as humans with that capacity for reason and will.
Applying wisdom in how we design, regulate, and utilize AI.
We have to provide that ethical compass that AI inherently lacks.
It's a constant process of discernment and moral consideration.
Now, we were about to circle back to Aquinas' thought.
Our intellect reasons by moving from self-evident first principles through composition and division. Machine learning systems, by contrast, derive patterns statistically. Would you deem their inferences truly rational or merely calculative? And what does that mean for entrusting them with judicial or pastoral judgments?
Oh, that's a really insightful question that gets right to the heart of how we understand reasoning. Let's unpack this distinction between human and machine intelligence.
You're drawing a crucial contrast between deductive reasoning from first principles and inductive reasoning from statistical patterns,
Aquinas emphasized how our intellect operates by grasping self-evident truths.
and moving through logical steps of composition and division to reach conclusions.
He believed that this ability to understand first principles is fundamental to rational thought.
Now, machine learning systems, as you pointed out, work very differently.
They analyze vast amounts of data to identify statistical correlations and patterns.
Their inferences are based on the probability of certain outcomes given the data they've been trained on.
So, would Aquinas consider this truly rational in the same way he understood human reason?
It's unlikely. He tied rationality to that capacity to grasp universal truths and reason logically from them.
Machine learning, while incredibly powerful for certain tasks,
Doesn't necessarily demonstrate that same kind of understanding of underlying principles.
it's more about calculation and prediction based on data.
And this distinction has significant implications for entrusting AI with complex judgments.
Especially in areas like judicial or pastoral roles that require wisdom and understanding of human nature.
Those kinds of judgments often rely on more than just statistical probabilities.
They involve empathy, understanding of context, and ethical considerations.
Qualities that are rooted in that rational soul Aquinas described.
So while AI can be a valuable tool, your question highlights the limitations of seeing its inferences as equivalent to human rational judgment.
It really makes us think about what constitutes genuine understanding and wisdom.
If human dignity flows from being created, does assigning critical moral decisions to AI diminish our exercise of rational freedom and thus obscure that image?
That's a really profound question that gets to the heart of human nature and our relationship with technology.
Okay, let's really dig into this idea of human dignity flowing from being created in God's image.
Aquinas believed that our rational soul,
With its capacity for intellect and will, is a key aspect of that divine likeness.
the ability to exercise rational freedom, is central to that.
When we consider assigning critical moral decisions to AI,
It raises serious questions about our own agency.
if we delegate those choices, are we diminishing our own capacity for moral reasoning?
Aquinas would likely emphasize the importance of cultivating virtue through our choices.
And if those choices are increasingly made by algorithms,
It could potentially hinder our development of prudence.
that ability to discern the good and act rightly.
It might also distance us from the consequences of those moral decisions.
If we're not actively engaging in that process of deliberation,
Are we in danger of losing a part of what makes us distinctly human in Aquinas' view?
it feels like we're outsourcing a fundamental aspect of our being
And that could indeed obscure that image of God within us.
by not fully exercising our rational freedom.
It's a really important ethical consideration as AI becomes more sophisticated.
So, could an algorithm ever embody the precepts of natural law, or must discernment of bonum and malum remain irreducibly human?
That's a really insightful question about natural law and AI.
Let's unpack this idea of algorithms and natural law,
You're asking if an algorithm can truly embody the precepts of natural law.
and whether the discernment of good and evil remains uniquely human,
Aquinas believed natural law is something inscribed in human nature.
derivable through our reason and our inherent orientation towards the good.
It's about those universal moral principles.
Things we can understand as right or wrong through our intellect.
Now, can algorithm, however sophisticated, truly embody that?
Since it lacks a rational soul and free will in the Thomistic sense,
It operates based on code and data, not inherent understanding of good.
it can identify patterns that align with certain moral principles.
But is that the same as discerning bonum and malum?
Aquinas would likely say that true discernment requires reason and will,
That ability to understand the why behind the moral principle.
and to choose freely to act in accordance with it.
So while AI might mimic adherence to natural law in its outputs,
The underlying capacity for that discernment likely remains human.
it brings us back to the difference between calculation and genuine understanding.
And the unique capacity of human reason and conscience.
Now, we were about to circle back to Aquinas' thoughts on art's purpose.
Only God, Aquinas says, searches secrets of the heart. AI claims to predict emotions and intentions from digital traces. Does this trespass on sacred ground? And how should humanity temper such ambitions?
That's a profound question that raises important ethical considerations.
Let's unpack this idea of AI and the secrets of the heart in Aquinas' view.
You're right. Aquinas emphasizes the unique capacity of God to know the inner thoughts and intentions of individuals.
It speaks to God's omniscience, that all-knowing nature.
When AI algorithms claim to predict emotions and intentions,
By analyzing digital footprints, it does feel like it's entering a sensitive area.
does it truly understand those inner states, or is it just identifying patterns in behavior?
That's a crucial distinction. Aquinas would likely say that genuine understanding of the heart.
requires that divine insight into the soul.
So while AI might offer predictions based on data,
It wouldn't have that same direct access to the secrets of the heart.
your question about whether this trespasses on sacred ground is interesting.
It touches on the uniqueness of human interiority and the limits of technology. It highlights the need for a careful, ethical reflection
Perhaps it's about maintaining a sense of humility
about what these technologies can truly know and understand.
and ensuring we don't overstate their capabilities in this realm.
It also brings up questions of privacy and the potential for misuse.
Now, we were glad to circle back to Aquinas's thoughts on art's purpose.
Since goodness has the aspect of a final cause, how can developers ensure AI systems are oriented toward authentic human flourishing and salvation rather than mere efficiency or profit?
That's a really important question that gets right to the heart of the ethics of AI development. If goodness does indeed have the aspect of an end, as Aquinas argues,
Then the goals we set for AI systems become absolutely crucial.
developers would need to consciously design AI with human flourishing as the ultimate aim.
Not just efficiency or profit, but what truly serves human good.
This connects back to
Prudence being that right reason directed towards the good end.
so developers would need to exercise prudence in their work.
Thinking not just about what AI can do, but what it should do.
That involves a deep understanding of human nature and our ultimate ends.
Aquinas delves into this idea of human perfection,
Considering what constitutes a truly good life for human beings.
incorporating those principles into the design of AI would be essential.
It's about aligning the final cause of AI and good.
This also brings in the role of moral virtue, which you mentioned earlier,
Developers and society as a whole need to cultivate that desire for the good.
so that the pursuit of efficiency and profit doesn't overshadow those higher goals.
It's a constant ethical balancing act.
Absolutely. Now, we're about to circle back to Aquinas's thought.
Last question. Could you concisely give me Thomas Aquinas' perspective on AI and what he would think about the future we are heading towards with the development of it? Should we be afraid or should we not be afraid because these things can never take over humanity? What would Thomas Aquinas?
From what we've discussed, Aquinas would likely see AI as a tool.
Like any art or human invention, its goodness depends on its use.
He'd emphasize the lack of a rational soul and will in AI.
So it wouldn't possess true understanding in his view.
He might caution against relying solely on technology.
He valued human reason and virtue as essential for the good life.
The focus should remain on human flourishing, guided by those principles.
As for fear, he might say that rightly ordered technology,
Serving virtuous ends shouldn't be a source of fear.
but unchecked ambition and misuse would be a concern.
He believed God governs all, so a complete takeover might be unlikely.
But human responsibility in guiding these tools is paramount.
Now, bringing us back to where we were,
We were about to discuss Aquinas' perspective on art's purpose.
All right. So that is the first episode in me interviewing or getting the perspectives of these ancient thinkers, these Christian thinkers, philosophical thinkers. And the whole goal behind this is to see potentially what they would have said based on their source documents about AI and the fear everybody has of AI as it currently stands. I hope you enjoyed it. This is going to be a regular thing. So maybe hit the subscribe button, like it, whatever you want to do. But I'll be dropping these more. They'll improve over time as well. Much love. Peace.